They didn't steal my boat or my car or my house. No, they stole my dock. Just walked right onto my property, pointed at the thing I built with my own two hands, and said, "This belongs to Brent now." Brent is her son, Jobless, entitled, always glued to his phone. And I'm Darren, by the way. I'm an engineer. Not the kind of guy who yells or causes scenes. But that day, I came dangerously close to losing my cool. This whole thing spiraled so fast, so strangely, that even now, I still wonder how I didn't completely lose my mind. Have you ever had something taken from you like that? I mean, really taken, something that meant more than just wood and nails? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy caught up in neighborhood drama. I'm 35, I work long hours as an engineer, and honestly, all I ever wanted was to come home, sit on my dock, drink my coffee, and enjoy the quiet. For years, my mornings followed a sacred rhythm, coffee in hand, the lake stretched out in front of me, silence all around. That peace shattered the day Brent showed up. My little slice of heaven was a 20-foot wooden dock I built myself. Nothing fancy, but solid, well-constructed, built to code. It wasn't just a structure to me, it was my sanctuary. I should have known that kind of peace never lasts. Especially not when new neighbors move in who seem to believe the world revolves around them. The trouble started about 2 months after Pamela Sloan moved into the house 3 doors down. Pamela was one of those women you notice immediately, blonde bob haircut that looked salon perfect, always carrying a clipboard like she was running for office. And she had this walkie-talkie thing she'd talk into constantly. Within a week of moving in, she'd somehow gotten herself elected as the new HOA president. Looking back, I should have questioned how that happened so fast. But honestly, I didn't care about neighborhood politics. As long as no one messed with me or my dock, I figured we'd all get along just fine. Boy, was I wrong. The first sign of trouble was her son, Brent. He was probably in his mid-20s, always on his phone, and from what I could tell, didn't have a job. Not that I'm judging, times are tough, and maybe he was trying to find work. But there was something about the way he wandered around the neighborhood that set me on edge. It wasn't casual. Hands stuffed in the pockets of his oversized hoodie, head tilted, watching the dock like it might answer back. At first, he'd just walk by my place and stare at the dock for a few minutes. Not hostile, just curious, I guess. I didn't think much of it. But then he started coming back. And not just passing by, he started setting up camp. First, a cooler. Then a chair. Then a Bluetooth speaker, just loud enough to ruin the silence, but not loud enough to officially complain about. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he didn't realize it was private property. Maybe his mom hadn't explained the boundaries. The dock sits right on the water. Maybe from a distance it looked like community space if you didn't know better. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe he was just lost. But deep down, something in my gut tightened every time I saw him there. I didn't say anything the first few times. But by week 4, things escalated. He started bringing snacks, a cooler, even a folding chair. And here's the part that really got to me. He started leaving trash. Empty chip bags, soda cans, sandwich wrappers. Just left them there for me to clean up. I remember standing there one evening, picking up his garbage, thinking, asterisk, this can't be an accident anymore. He has to know this is my property, asterisk. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. I walked out to my dock with my coffee, ready to start my day the way I always did. And there was Brent, sprawled across the wooden bench where I usually sit, feet up, sipping a beer can, at 8 a.m., sitting right on top of my old design catalog I'd left out the night before. I took a deep breath, walked over, and said as politely as I could, "Excuse me, this is private property." The kid looked up, actually shrugged, and went right back to scrolling on his phone like I hadn't said a word. I stood there for 10 seconds, waiting for some kind of response, some acknowledgement. Nothing. Just the sound of his fingers tapping on the screen. I was about to say something else, probably something I'd regret, when I heard voices from Pamela's yard. I couldn't make out everything, but I caught enough to make my blood run cold. As I walked back toward my house, trying to figure out what to do next, I heard Pamela on the phone in her backyard. She was saying, "Just keep him out there every day. People get used to seeing things, then it becomes normal." I froze. I actually stopped walking and stood there in the shadows between our properties, listening. Once it's been going on for a few weeks, we can make it official. Nobody questions something that's already happening. I couldn't see her face, but I could hear the satisfaction in her voice, like she was already celebrating a victory. Standing there, I suddenly realized I wasn't dealing with some clueless kid who didn't understand property lines. This was planned. This was deliberate. Pamela was using her son to stake a claim on my dock, and they were both in on it. The way Brent had dismissed me, the increasing boldness, the timing, it all made perfect sense now. I felt a wave of anger and disbelief. Who does that? Who moves into a neighborhood and immediately starts plotting to take over someone else's property? But then I thought about that clipboard she always carried, the walkie-talkie, the way she'd become HOA president overnight. This woman was a planner, and apparently I was her next target. 3 mornings passed in a blur of tension until that envelope hit my mailbox like a thrown brick. I was standing in my driveway, flipping through the usual bills and junk mail, when I saw it, a thick envelope stamped with Homeowners Association, Urgent Community Matter in red ink. I tore it open right there. What I read made me question whether I was living in reality or some kind of bureaucratic nightmare. It felt like reading a hallucination, like someone had taken scissors to reality and pasted their own version on top. The letter informed me that my dock was being redesignated as Community Waterfront Access and that Brent Sloan had been assigned as the official waterfront coordinator due to special community needs. Community Waterfront Access? My dock wasn't even visible from the street. You had to walk through my backyard to get to it. And waterfront coordinator? What was he coordinating? His afternoon naps and the trail of trash he left behind. I looked at the signature line. It was signed by something called the Emergency Community Board and countersigned by the former board secretary. That name rang a bell. I dug out my old HOA paperwork. Sure enough, that secretary had been on the board until she moved away 4 months ago. I called her old number, her voicemail confirmed it. She hadn't been involved in HOA business since March. So not only was this entire thing completely made up, but they'd forged a signature from someone who didn't even live here anymore. How stupid did they think I was? Or maybe the better question, how stupid did they think everyone else was? Surely other neighbors would notice the former secretary hadn't been to a meeting in months. But then again, how many people actually paid attention to HOA politics? Most folks just wanted to keep their heads down and avoid drama. Maybe Pamela was counting on that. Maybe she figured if she threw around enough official-looking paperwork, people would just assume it was real. It was a calculated gamble that everyone would be too busy or too trusting to verify her claims. And honestly, it probably would have worked on most people, but not on an engineer trained to check every specification twice. I'd once flagged a miscalculated drainage spec on a city project that saved them $500,000. Now I was using those same instincts to fight off what felt like a full-blown coup. I attacked the lie like a blueprint review, highlighting fault lines, cross-referencing every clause, marking contradictions like cracks in a wall. I pulled out my purchase agreement, survey maps, original HOA bylaws, county records, everything. My engineering background kicked in. I approached this like any technical problem: gather the data, analyze it systematically, and expose the flaws. And boy, were there flaws. First, there wasn't a single clause in the HOA rules about converting private property to community use. Not even close. The community access provisions only applied to areas already designated as common space, and my dock was built entirely on my lot. Second, the Emergency Community Board didn't exist. According to the bylaws, any changes to property designations had to be voted on by the full membership, with 30 days' notice. When I called the HOA office to ask about this mysterious emergency vote, the receptionist sounded confused. She put me on hold for 5 minutes, then came back saying Mrs. Sloan had approved everything through proper channels and that there had been adequate community input. I asked for specifics. What vote? When? Who was present? She said she'd have Mrs. Sloan call me back to explain. That was on a Thursday. By Monday, I still hadn't heard from Pamela. But Brent had apparently decided the official letter gave him carte blanche to treat my dock like his personal resort. I'm talking folding chair, cooler full of beer, even a little portable table where he'd set up his phone to watch videos. The kid had essentially moved his entire afternoon routine to my property, and I was starting to feel like a hotel owner who never agreed to rent out rooms. The whole situation would have been almost comical if it wasn't so infuriating. Here was a grown man camped out on my property, acting like he owned the place, while his mother hid behind fake paperwork and forged signatures. And the craziest part? Other neighbors were starting to treat it like it was normal. Mrs. Miller from next door waved at Brent one afternoon like he belonged there. The Johnsons mentioned, in passing, how nice it was to see the waterfront area getting some use. It was like Pamela's plan was actually working. People were getting used to seeing Brent on my dock, and soon they'd start believing that's just how things were supposed to be. I couldn't help but wonder how many neighborhood traditions had started this way, someone bold enough to keep doing something until everyone else got tired of questioning it. That's when I caught my first real glimpse of Greg, Pamela's husband. I'd seen him around, but never really paid attention. Middle-aged, quiet, kept to himself. But one evening, I was watching from my kitchen window as Brent made his usual mess on my dock, and I saw Greg walk out to their backyard. He stopped, stared at the scene for a moment, shook his head, and walked back inside. There was something in his body language that suggested he wasn't on board with his wife's schemes. I wondered if he even knew what she was doing, or if he was just as much in the dark as the rest of us. Either way, it was clear that not everyone in the Sloan household was united behind this ridiculous plan. I decided it was time to stop playing defense and start taking action. I called a property lawyer that Friday and explained the whole situation. He listened patiently as I read him the fake HOA letter. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, then said, "Well, that's certainly creative." He agreed to send a cease and desist letter to both the HOA and Pamela personally, demanding they stop trespassing on my property and retract their fraudulent claims. He also suggested I document everything from now on: photos, videos, dates, times, witnesses. "If this goes to court," he said, "we want a clear record." Holding that forged letter in my hands, I realized I was in a game where I didn't yet know all the rules. But did they know who they were playing with? The cease and desist letter hit Pamela like a lightning bolt, and her reaction was anything but measured. My lawyer sent it on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, my phone was ringing every hour on the hour, Pamela screaming at me about harassment, legal bullying, and attacking a family in need. At 2:13 a.m., she left a voicemail that started with legal threats and ended with her weeping about protecting the community spirit. I saved them all. The first call, I actually tried to have a reasonable conversation. I explained that the dock was on my property, that her letter contained forged signatures, and that if she wanted to discuss community waterfront access, there were proper channels for that. But reasoning with Pamela was like negotiating with a hurricane. She just talked over me, louder and louder, until I finally hung up. Then she'd call right back. By Thursday, she'd moved beyond phone calls and launched what I can only describe as a neighborhood smear campaign. She started going door to door, telling anyone who'd listen that I was selfish, anti-community, preventing access to public waterfront space, and denying basic recreational opportunities to a young man who just needed a place to relax and recover. She painted Brent as a victim, persecuted by his mean, wealthy neighbor who hoarded lakefront access. The wealthy part was especially ridiculous. I'm an engineer, not a tech mogul. I bought this house because it was the smallest lakefront property available, and it still stretched my budget. But here's the thing about neighborhood gossip. It doesn't have to be true to be effective. Within a week, I could feel the shift. Mrs. Miller, who used to chat with me about her garden when I got the mail, suddenly found reasons to go back inside when she saw me coming. The Johnsons stopped waving when I drove past. Someone, though I have my suspicions, started throwing trash on my lawn every few days. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to let me know I wasn't exactly winning any popularity contests. I kept asking myself, how did I become the villain here? All I was doing was trying to use my own property, something I'd built, maintained, and poured my heart into. But somewhere along the way, the story had flipped. I wasn't the guy defending his space anymore. I was the angry neighbor, the one hoarding access, the one making life difficult for a struggling young man. It felt like I'd stepped into some twisted version of high school, where the loudest narrative won, no matter how far it strayed from the truth. The dock wasn't just wood and nails to me. It was where I'd scattered my father's ashes on a quiet morning in October, the wind soft over the water. It was where my niece stood, wide-eyed and giggling, when she caught her first fish, her tiny hands barely able to hold the rod. It was where I'd sat after long days at work, where I'd watched sunsets turn the lake into liquid gold. To them, it was just a structure. To me, it was memory anchored to land. The breaking point came on a Saturday afternoon. I'd been watching Brent for weeks, showing up like he had every right, leaving trash, acting like my dock was his personal retreat. That day, I finally snapped. I walked out, coffee still in hand, and said in a voice louder than I'd meant to use, "Get off my dock. Now." Brent didn't argue. He didn't even stand up. He just looked up at me, smirking, and held up his phone, filming the whole thing. I could see the red recording light blinking as I stood there, frustration boiling over. And just like that, I'd played right into their hands. A shaky video of a man losing his cool, no context, no backstory, just raw emotion. I knew it wouldn't be long before Pamela had it, spinning it as proof of my hostile behavior toward her vulnerable son. Afterward, I sat on my back porch, head in my hands, wondering if I'd gone too far. Maybe I should have tried to compromise. Maybe I could have set up some kind of shared schedule. But then I'd look at the dock, the handrails I'd sanded smooth, the support beams I'd reinforced after a storm, and remember, this was mine. Built with my time, my money, my sweat. If I let this go now, what message would that send? That persistence and manipulation could override ownership? That if you show up often enough, loud enough, people will eventually hand over what's not yours? So I made a decision. If they wanted to play games, I'd play them too, but I'd play them better. First, I hired a professional surveyor to map the exact boundaries of my property. No more guessing, no more debates about where my land ended. I wanted official, legally recognized documentation, something that couldn't be argued away with a fake letter or a clipboard. While I waited for the results, I started documenting everything. Photos of Brent on the dock, timestamps on videos, close-ups of the trash he left behind. One night, my camera even caught Pamela out in her yard, pointing at my dock while whispering into her walkie-talkie like she was directing a covert operation. It was surreal, but I didn't laugh. I saved it all. That's when Mary approached me. She lived 2 houses down from the Sloanes, an older woman who'd been in the neighborhood for over 20 years. Quiet, observant, the kind of person who knew things without being told. One afternoon, as I was watering my plants, probably looking more defeated than I realized, she walked over and said, almost under her breath, "That boy isn't her real son, you know." I looked up, surprised. She glanced around, making sure no one was nearby, then continued. "She took him in a few years ago after his parents passed. But between you and me, I don't think she wanted a son. I think she wanted someone to use." The way she said use sent a chill down my spine. I asked her what she meant, but she just shook her head and said, "Just keep your eyes open, dear." This isn't the first time she's tried to expand her territory. When the survey came back, it confirmed what I already knew. The dock was 100% on my property. Not a single beam crossed into common space. The lines were clear, the measurements precise. But Mary's words stayed with me. Someone to use. I started wondering, had other neighbors dealt with Pamela before? Had they given in quietly, not wanting the fight? How many small surrenders had built up to her sense of entitlement? I wasn't going to be another one. The next Monday, I called a fencing company and ordered a 6-foot privacy fence with a locking gate, high-quality materials, concrete footings, the whole package. When they asked about permits, I told them I'd handle it myself. That afternoon, I went down to City Hall, filed all the paperwork, and made sure everything was by the book. 3 days later, the permit was approved, and I got multiple copies just in case. This wasn't just about building a fence. It was about drawing a line literally and figuratively. No more ambiguity. No more fake HOA letters. No more watching a stranger treat my sanctuary like his personal hangout. On Tuesday morning, the delivery truck arrived, unloading posts, panels, concrete bags, and hardware right in my driveway. Impossible to miss. I'd taken the day off work to oversee everything. There was something deeply satisfying about seeing those materials stacked there, knowing what they represented. Control, clarity, reclaiming what was mine.